now streaming on Facebook Live. It's always a little bit of a question when exactly we get on there, so I always feel like there's probably about 20 seconds of me sitting here looking like this before we get started. But hey, there you go. We're learning every day, and hopefully one of these days we'll get it right. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Just want to welcome everybody to today's Monday Meets with Katherine Pohl. She's our Human Trafficking Program Coordinator. I'm Will Averill. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Willow. For those of you who have not tuned into a Monday Meets before, let me tell you a little bit what we're about. This is a chance to get to know the programs of the Willow and the people behind those programs, to talk not only a little bit about what we do, but the scope of services which we offer and how each individual program fits within that overall scope of service. The Willow, for anyone who doesn't know, provides shelter support and services to survivors of direct domestic violence and human trafficking in Douglas, Franklin, and Jefferson County. We do serve all three counties. Last year, we provided over 6,900 nights of safe rest to survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking, and fielded over 5,000 phone calls. Human trafficking is a more recent program. We were originally set up as a domestic violence center and added human trafficking a few years ago, but it certainly has been an important part of our overall programming. And I'm hoping we can get a little bit of insight on the program itself, what it does, and how it sort of works within the overall scheme of what we do at the Willow. So Catherine, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. Could we just kind of start with some information about you? How long have you been with the Willow? What different jobs have you had? Because this isn't your first role here, right?
Right, it is not my first role. Like Will said, I'm Katherine Pohl, and I have been with the Willow a little over 2.5 years. I started as an intern and fell in love with what the Willow does, and really found my calling and my passion and helping people and getting to know survivors, and I didn't want to part with it. So as soon as a position opened, I just knew I had to apply for it. So I started out as the health and wellness coordinator, and in that position I worked directly in our shelter with survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking, and help them reach their goals with health and wellness, but also just direct advocacy and helping them reach any goal that they had, really focused on mental health and physical health, and helping them with appointments and stuff like that, hooking them up with proper resources in the community for traumatic brain injuries and other things. So I loved that position. I met really wonderful people, and when this position opened up, I wasn't sure. I was, when I came to the Willow, it was because I was learning more about human trafficking and domestic violence also, but human trafficking was really shocking to me that it was happening in our communities and in Kansas. And when this position opened up, I jumped right in and knew I just had to apply for it. I had to give it a shot. I wanted to help survivors of human trafficking, and so now here I am.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said that, because I really didn't know a lot about human trafficking when I started with the Willow, and I think we all have these kind of preconceived notions of what trafficking is and what it means, that it's something that happens, either to foreign nationals, or it happens other places and it doesn't happen here in the heartland, or you get that sort of Taken. You think it's like the movie Taken, that sort of a situation. But it's actually much more localized and much more insidious than that.
It is. And much like domestic violence, we talk about that it can affect anybody, any age, any background. It does not discriminate. And human trafficking, it involves a trafficker using force, fraud, or coercion to control an individual's well-being. They make them engage in commercial sex acts or labor, all those things. And those things are happening in Kansas, and they are happening in our communities. And what we see a lot too is survival sex, where people are forced into sexual acts for money to pay rent, or to have a place to live, or to have food to eat. And we see that a lot. And traffickers are very smart, and they will try to find people who are extra vulnerable, who need those things to survive, and use them for those purposes.
So, when we talk about the link between domestic violence and human trafficking, it's like they're two kind of circles in a Venn diagram, along with sexual assault, and so they
Right.
kind of overlap a little bit in the areas in which they are alike and that they are apart. What have you found really as kind of the challenges in working with human trafficking survivors and barriers that they face that are a little bit different than the barriers that domestic violence survivors face?
Yeah, so really as a whole, like you said, there's just a lot of overlap with domestic violence and human trafficking survivors, and human trafficking survivors are a very vulnerable population, and they face many challenges. They're also forced into illegal acts, so a lot of them, when they do seek help, are criminalized for what they've had to do to survive. And so we do see a difference in that. There's also a lot more trust issues. A lot of people, individuals, get wrapped up into human trafficking through relationships, starting a relationship with somebody who has ill intent, and who do things to them through gaining their trust, right? And so we do really struggle. They struggle with that, with trying to find people that they can trust to meet their needs and to make sure that they're safe. And so we do see that difference. Also, traffickers do, the way we also see overlap is traffickers use physical violence, emotional manipulation, overbearing control, and those are all direct hallmarks of domestic violence. And so we do see a lot of overlap, but human trafficking survivors do see a lot more barriers, a lot with addiction. A lot of survivors of human trafficking get addicted to drugs by their trafficker, or just means of surviving that time in their life. And so they hit those barriers with addiction. So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, and I think that's I think addiction is a really, really key point. And that you talk about the localized nature of human trafficking as opposed to the kind of national or international level. One thing I certainly hadn't thought about before I started working for the Willow, in relation to that system, was that we will have survivors who, for example, will be picked up by traffickers in, say, Wichita, and then they will be moved kind of along the highways via Topeka, Kansas City, through Lawrence, so that it can be as localized as that. It's just having the means to get someone in a place where you have that power and control over them, and also where you remove them from their support system. So
Right.
The difficulty in having support systems, or knowing where those support systems are, is kind of added to by the fact that most of them are taken to a location where they don't have any network, they don't have any friends, they don't have any idea
Right.
of kind of how to access those resources.
Right. And then not being able to trust people, just adds on top of that. But yeah, we see people from out of state being brought into state. We see, like you said, just from Wichita, Topeka, anywhere to get them away from any kind of support system where they would have any way out. So we see that a lot.
So what kind of services do we offer at the Willow then for survivors of human trafficking? Both services that are similar to and done with survivors of domestic violence, and also services that we may offer that may be exclusive to survivors of human trafficking.
Yeah, so shelter is an option for both, right? Human trafficking and domestic violence survivors. And in shelter, we have an advocate that is directly trained in human trafficking. And so all of our advocates are trained in both, but we have one that is primarily human trafficking. And so when we are serving people in our shelter, we have a case management model. So the human trafficking advocate would directly work with that survivor and provide other support systems, more further education on human trafficking if that's what they would like. We're empowerment based, so whatever whatever the survivor wants is, and how they want to work through their goals and their trauma is what we're going to do to support them. And so, but we do have a direct advocate that is just human trafficking. And then, and I'm also part-time in shelter. So we have that where we make that connection, where I would also work with that survivor, because then transitioning out of shelter, we've built that trust, we've built that rapport. They know who I am. And so then when they leave shelter, when we can get them to a safe place, and then I can continue to work with them in the community. I meet with survivors on a regular basis. I check in with them for, we still work on goals and still accomplishing goals, and just as a support. So they're having a rough day, or if we need to look into addiction services or anything, I'm there as their backbone, as somebody that they know, that they can trust, that they know that they have to offer. There's nothing that they need to worry about. There's no other reason why I'm doing it other than to help them. And so we just try to make the connections. We make the connection. And then there's survivors who don't necessarily need shelter, but they still need human trafficking advocacy. And so I work with them to again, build that rapport with them, to get them their goals, to meet those needs, and be a stable person in their life. And when I'm not there, we work on different grounding techniques, different things that they can use to cope through what they've been through. But knowing that they still have a support system with the Willow, and knowing that we do offer support groups. We do offer these things for coming through trauma and getting on the other side of that as best they can. And so we're that support system. So what we do for domestic violence and human trafficking is very, very similar. But we do have this specific program that really focuses on the education behind it, and being that stable system behind them that is just there to see them succeed, and no other reason than to see them succeed.
One interesting thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier that I just kind of wanted to touch back on again, because I think it is such a kind of vital point, is that education aspect of things. Because oftentimes when you're building those relationships and building with the trust with survivors, one thing I've spoken with other advocates about is human trafficking. We have questions about it as part of our intake and part of our questionnaire, but for some survivors, they won't even realize they're being trafficked until later in the process, until actually talking a little bit about what trafficking entails.
Right.
So I think that's really kind of an interesting phenomenon. It's something that I think when people think about this, that they may not necessarily think about, is that the situation when it comes to something like survival sex, it can be in this kind of gray area where they don't think it's human trafficking. But again, once that coercion and that power and control is in there, then it does in fact become that, and that can be a very, very blurred line.
Right. And, so we really, part of our case management model is to provide this education, and we really focus on, red flags of an abusive personality and the power and control wheel. But we just have a whole page on how to break down what human trafficking is without getting too wordy. It can get confusing. It can go into things that don't make sense to people, because human trafficking, it's so dynamic, right? There's so many different ways people can be trafficked, and it is such a hidden crime, and it's such an underreported crime. And so we really focus on that. And even if the survivor isn't ready to talk about it, that's okay. We're still going to give them that education and let them know that when you are ready, we're here. If you're never ready, that's okay too, right? But providing that education to know what it is, to know this is something that I maybe need to process, or this is something I need to look out for in the future, or for my friends or for my family. And the more we can spread that education, the better. It can save someone's life. And so we really try to focus on it and make it as simple and most understandable as possible, because it does get really murky. The understanding of human trafficking gets confusing.
Absolutely. One thing we spoke about a little bit beforehand, and it's a question that I often get, and I wanted to kind of pose to you, but also one that we discussed is kind of a difficult one to answer, because there's not a huge range of options. But for folks who feel like they may be witnessing human trafficking, first of all, what are some of the red flags if you're in a situation and you see something, and then you think maybe it could be human trafficking? What kind of red flags do you look out for? And then what can people do if they feel like they're witnessing human trafficking in action?
Yeah. So I want to break that down a little bit. So when we're talking about like the signs of human trafficking, it's a lengthy list, right? So there's a lot
Right.
of things. There's a lot of things that come up that you're like, oh, maybe that seems a little weird, or that doesn't seem quite right. And some things that, just to look out for, like physically, are some, excuse me, branding. A lot of traffickers brand their victims in forms of scars or burns. We see tattoos a lot, and so that can look like somebody's name. That can look like an actual like an actual brand, a barcode, like a barcode on them. And so those are some things we look out for, really on the neck, on the lower back area. Those are the places that we see most often. But also, if you see someone who's like very, very malnourished, serious dental issues, disoriented or confused, they don't know where they are, right? They don't know what town they're in. They don't know how they really got there, or what are the surrounding areas. Verbally, if when they're responding to you, they seem like they're being coached. That's a big sign. If they're somewhere and you're trying to talk to them, or they're trying to talk to you, but they're not allowed to talk to you, right? The person that they're with is the one answering any questions you have. We see that a lot in, responses at the emergency room and in doctor's offices, because eventually someone's going to have to go to the doctor. And if
Right.
so, they're with somebody and they're answering all the questions, or they're holding their identification and they're the ones handing that to you. That's a sign, right? If they have no control over answering medical questions when it's them.
Right.
So I'm also very reluctant to discuss anything in front of somebody. So there's also, not being tended to medically. We see, people who have super oversized clothes, clothes that don't fit them at all, or shoes that aren't like for the right time of year and stuff like that. Those are signs that something isn't quite right. And so those are just a few signs. If somebody, so red flags of a trafficker would be that they come on really strong, right? They come on really strong in a relationship. They promise you things that seem too good to be true. We say that in domestic violence cases as well. It's a way to get that power and control over you, right? Things that seem a little too good to be true. Maybe step back and kind of think about that a little bit more. With labor trafficking and stuff, we see things like they're offering you this huge amount of money, $4,000 or in 2 weeks or a week of doing this work. And it seems too good to be true, that they offer you a job and they say it's only good until 5 o'clock, or it's only, you have to tell me right now, right? You have to tell me right now if you're going to do this job or not. That's a red flag. So we also see, denying any contact with your friends or family, really isolating you, taking away any documentation you have, your ID, your credit cards, anything like that, your birth certificate, no way to identify you, taking that away from you, asks you to do things completely outside of your comfort zone, asks you to do favors for them in exchange for money. These are all really big signs of human trafficking, and it is a common thing. It is happening in our community. And if you do see this, and if you are worried for somebody, getting involved and putting yourself in the middle is probably not the safest thing. We talk about that with domestic violence too. And so, it gets scary and it gets risky for both you and the survivor going through it. And so I would, I suggest that people call 911, they report it, talking about it, speaking about it, reporting it is going to be the way that we can save people's lives and get people the help that they need when they need it. But also, there's a National Human Trafficking Hotline where you can report anonymously, and there's also a texting number on there as well, and there's like a chat box, and all of that can be done anonymously, and they report directly to the authorities, who then follow up immediately. And so I would really encourage people to look at the National Human Trafficking Hotline .org, and we can put that in the chat, or I can do that later. But that is really the best way to kind of just spark that conversation around what you've seen, and try to get people the help that they need in that. Also just being aware of places like us, right? So if somebody comes to you and asks like these questions about human trafficking or domestic violence, and just pointing them in the direction of the Willow, and hopefully they'll reach out and we can do our best to help them and get them safe. And but calling 911 instead of being really cognizant of putting yourself in the middle of a situation.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That is really great. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free keeping an eye here on the phone. So if anyone has any questions or comments that you'd like to bring up here towards the end, that would be that we would love to field them. But one more thing quickly, kind of as we get towards wrapping up. We've obviously, a lot of our services have been sort of affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic, and so I just wanted to kind of check and see like what services are have been altered for you for the human trafficking program, and how are you kind of coping with those changes?
Yeah, so I think much like the barriers that we already knew about for survivors of human trafficking and domestic violence survivors, this pandemic really magnified those things, right? So it kept people home, it kept people in danger, it kept people away from people who may identify that they're being hurt or trafficked or abused, like doctors' offices or therapists, or even just going to the just going out and being around people that may notice that the situation doesn't feel quite right. And so we hit those barriers again, and they were magnified and just isolate, they were a lot more isolated, and not being able to meet with people because of the risk of COVID was difficult. And we did our best, and we met with people outside, and we did whatever we could in public locations where we knew they would be safe. And so we kept on through this, and I'm happy to be getting back to it, to seeing more clients and helping people the best we can as more resources open up, and our community is really working together to keep people safe. And so there's been a lot of barriers with this, with just the lack of resources and the lack of help. And but our survivors are resilient, and they're doing well, and they're reaching out for help, and luckily we're able to meet with them and help them.
Okay. We'll just say right now that if you do need to get a hold of us, the number is 785-843-3333 is the 24-hour hotline. Also, we are available, the Willow Domestic Violence Center, or at Willow DV Center on Facebook and Twitter. The Facebook is regularly looked at. So if it's a situation where you don't feel comfortable contacting us by phone, you can send a message via Facebook, and that's probably the most reliable way that's not phone contact to get in touch with the organization. So that has pretty much all the questions I had. Katherine, do you have anything else that you wanted to kind of add in? Any personal going on that you want to shout out, or anything like that?
I just want to shout out to our community partners and everybody who's been so great through all of this crisis and made themselves so available for all of our clients and all of their clients, and persevered through this very, very trying time. And we have the Douglas County Human Trafficking Task Force, and we've been able to still meet virtually and still connect and help one another through this, and to help our clients. And so I just want to, shout out to our community partners. They're amazing. They have really, come through, of course, like always. And our, we've gotten our survivors to a lot of really great places, even through this pandemic. And so I'm very thankful for all of them, and everybody being so flexible. So huge shout out to them. And of course, all my colleagues, we've been through a lot with this, and it's been good. It's been good. I'm thrilled to be able to help more people as this pandemic kind of dies down just a little bit, and things kind of open up a little bit. So
right. Yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen, but I think there's been a remarkable community come together, really, both with with our community partners and with our donors and supporters, and everybody kind of pitching in to help out. And it's been wonderful. Well, thank you so much. we'll be back next week with another Monday Meets. In the meantime, this week is the week of our exciting Willow Garden Party. We've got some garden party baskets that are going to be handed out on Saturday. However, our online auction is still open, so if you'd like to go look online, see what's available, it's a bunch of different fun packages. Most of them contain very safe social distancing things that you can do. There's a cooking class, there's a show in your backyard, there's a Trivial Pursuit game that you can help put together. There's a bunch of stuff that's at gardenparty2020.givesmart.net. .givesmart.com. We'll put the link in there for you. But feel free to have a look at that, and we'll be back next Monday for another Monday Meets. But thank you so much, Katherine. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.